Hi, I'm retired NYPD Detective Vic Ferrari, and welcome to NYPD Through the Looking Glass podcast, where you get unique insight into the New York City Police Department. Before we get started, I encourage you to check out my Amazon author page, where you'll find my series of behind-the-scenes NYPD books. They're $10 paperback or $2.99 ebook download, including my latest NYPD Presumption and Dysfunction. Hope everyone had a great week. I got a couple of funny stories for this week's show, but before we get there, let's go to the true crime section. A cop killer who shot an NYPD police officer to death over a pair of trendy sunglasses was released from prison on Tuesday. Police officer Juan Andino was killed on June 15, 1984, after he stopped Lee Ernest Walker, 3 names, to question him over the theft of a pair of $140 Cazal specs. Walker, 67 years old, was released on parole from Sing Sing Correctional Facility in Ossining after spending 40 years behind bars for first-degree murder. Walker is the 43rd cop killer paroled since 2017, when the rules governing how the 16-member state parole board weighs a prisoner's release were revised, in part because of lobbying from left-wing reformers. The board gives more weight to an inmate's age and record while in prison and less to the savagery of the crime they committed. During the struggle just after noon at the eye encounter in the 40 precinct, the thief managed to pull the officer's gun out of its holster. Andino then knocked the gun out of Walker's hand, but he was pushed to the floor and shot twice to the face and head. I can't say enough bad things about the New York State Parole Board. They're at it again. They have no respect for the citizens of New York. They have no respect for the New York City Police Department and law enforcement in general. And like I've said, they should live with these people. Now, this story is crazy if you've been following it over the weekend in Minnesota. Vance Bottler was arrested on June 25th after a 2-day manhunt described as the largest in Minnesota history. He faces federal and state charges, including first-degree murder, stalking, and firearms offenses, and attempted murder for the politically motivated shooting of Minnesota lawmakers and their spouses. He allegedly targeted 4 lawmakers' homes, posing as a police officer, using a modified SUV with police lights, a realistic silicone mask, and a tactical vest. Vance Luther Bottler's wife, Jenny Bottler, was detained for questioning during a traffic stop in Oneonta, Minnesota, where police found a weapon, ammunition, cash, and passports in her vehicle, which also carried 3 relatives. Jenny was not arrested and was released after a few hours. Here's the thing. Here's a guy, he dresses up like a cop. He kills these politicians that are Democrats. Now, all these politicians had recently voted against the party line of allocating money for illegal aliens for health care in their state. And after they had that vote, all hell broke loose. Here's the thing with this guy, Vance Bottler. He's married with 5 children. By all accounts, he's successful. He owns his own private security company. He lives in a nice neighborhood. Got a state job that Tampon Tim Walz appointed him to. While he's on the run, a roommate, supposedly that he lives with this guy a couple of days a week, who shows up on the steps of this porch wearing a Papa John's delivery shirt, and he looks like Matt Foley, just successful, and you're living part-time with a guy living in a van down by the river. I mean, come on. It doesn't make sense. Something tells me this is a psyop. There's a lot more to this story. It just doesn't make sense. A city teacher's union rep who lost a hard-fought race for president says she's now being harassed by foes who put her image on laminated cards and union urinals with the message, "Piss on my face." The cards were strategically placed in urinals of the men's rooms at the United Federation of Teachers headquarters in Manhattan during a delegated assembly meeting of 400 teachers and other educators last week. I've seen this before. It's happened in NYPD precincts where someone is not liked or they're busting someone's balls. I didn't see someone's face put on laminated cards dropped in the bottle urinal. But what I have seen is pictures of people decoupaged in urinals with bullseyes on it and piss in their face. I'm not saying it's right, but it's crazy. Now, speaking of golden showers, a Florida man is facing legal troubles after he allegedly urinated on over $10,000 worth of food at a Sam's Club. Patrick Francis Mitchell, 3 names, 70 years old enough to know better, was arrested on June 4th and charged with criminal mischief resulting in over $1,000 worth of damages. On May 30th, Mitchell allegedly was observed urinating in the aisle of a Sam's Club located in Lady Lake. Store video captured Mitchell walking up to two pallets, facing the shelf, placing both hands in front of him below the belt line and, well, you know. Footage also showed Mitchell allegedly walking around the snack section of the store and sitting on patio furniture for approximately 10 minutes before paying for his items and leaving. Well, at least not a shoplifter. Store managers later confirmed there was urine on the two pallets, which they say contained approximately 188 cans of Vienna sausage and 345 cans of Spam, resulting in the loss of about $10,000 in goods. Mitchell has pleaded not guilty. Good luck with that. Two New York State court officers were attacked at the Manhattan Criminal Courthouse at 100 Center Street around 9:45 a.m. A 37-year-old suspect, Jonathan Wool of Queens, slashed one officer in the face and another in the neck with a folding knife in what authorities describe as a targeted attack on uniformed workers working the security detail at metal detectors. A third officer was injured after being pushed into a barrier. The suspect, who has 18 prior arrests, mostly for drug-related offenses, was subdued by other officers and taken into custody. The injured officers were taken into Bellevue Hospital, treated and released, and are in stable condition. And thank God, full recoveries are expected. This is unreal. I know 100 Center Street quite well. It's the Manhattan Criminal Court. The NYPD has always had a good working relationship with the court officers. They're good guys, good women. This maniac, and they've beefed up security over the years. After 9/11, they had the metal detector. Maybe they had the metal detectors before 9/11, but there's a lot of security to get into these courthouses. And this guy was basically, I think it was a suicide mission. He probably figured they would have shot him, and they should have shot him by all accounts. I mean, he marches into a courthouse with a knife and just starts swinging it at these guys. He's lucky. Well, those court officers are lucky no one got hit in the artery because they'd be finished. So this week's story is entitled The Crack House Across the Street. So I grew up in the Throgs Neck section of the Bronx. As a child, it was a great neighborhood. It was almost like the country. I had friends that grew up in Manhattan and Inwood, and when they would come to Throgs Neck, they used to say, this is like the country. I'm like, country? There's the Cross Bronx Expressway. Like, I can hit it with a baseball from my house. But the kids from Manhattan always thought Throgs Neck was the country. And over the years, the neighborhood began to change. Partly because they must have changed the zoning laws, or people found a loophole in the zoning laws. Back then, a lot of the properties had big lots, and all of a sudden people started putting a second house on their lot and then started renting them out to renters. And fortunately, renters, not always, sometimes, but not always, don't take care of a property as well as the owner of a house. And on top of that, it adds to more vehicles, parking got difficult, the neighborhood just started going downhill. I'm a member of the New York City Police Department. I'm in the twilight of my career, and I'm thinking about moving in a couple of years, and I'm trying to convince my parents, listen, the neighborhood's changing. Maybe you guys should move to Florida or Jersey or upstate New York. Wouldn't have it. No. They were too set in their ways. But when I was a kid, they always wanted to move to Florida, but as they got older, it just seemed too big for them. They just wanted nothing to do with it. So what happens is my aunt had a tenant. My aunt had a two-family house, and a tenant moved out. And I said, you know what? This is perfect. I can keep an eye on my parents. I can help my aunt out because it snows to shovel the snow and fix things around the house. So I moved into my aunt's basement apartment. And the apartment used to be a garage. So on the street I lived in, it was all row houses. And they all look the same, basically, except in the 70s when aluminum siding, remember that crap? Aluminum siding came out. Then you'd have people with like a pink house on one side of his house and a blue house. Sometimes they'd put their heads together, it would be one color. And as a kid, they hated when we used to play ball in the street because you would dent someone's house. It was like denting a car. And you're not going to go to a body shop to get your house fixed because a kid hit a softball into the face of your house. So anyway, the house across the street from my parents, there was a family there that lived for years, and they were decent people. And what wound up happening is the parents died, the daughter inherited the house, and things went downhill from there. She became a drug addict, and then the next thing you know, her drug addict friends are hanging out. And I used to tell my parents, I go, it's starting to get rough over there. Maybe you should. No. So I take that apartment, keeping an eye on my parents. And one day I'm down at court. And I run into a guy that I used to work with, and now he's a detective in Bronx Narcotics. And he says, do your parents still live on that street? And I said, yeah, I can't get them out. I says, as a matter of fact, I actually live on that street now to keep an eye on him. He opens up a folder and he goes, I just got a search warrant for a house on your block. And I go, let me guess. And I didn't know the address off the top of my head, but he goes, yeah, that's it. I says, well, what's going on there? He goes, nothing big. He goes, garden variety, crack sales. He goes, we sent an undercover in. Did a hand-to-hand with a female. I'm like, okay, that makes sense. I'm pretty sure I know who that is. He says, yeah, we got a warrant. We're going to hit it sometime this week. I said, all right, cool. He says, I'll tell you what. He goes, when we're going to do the warrant, I'll give you a call. I said, all right, thanks. So I leave, and I'm thinking to myself, should I tell my parents about this? And then I was like, what am I doing to myself? So if I told my mother, forget it. She would be upset with me for burdening her with the information. She wouldn't tell anyone, but she wouldn't sleep nights for a couple of days, and she'd be peeking out the window, and it wouldn't be good. Now, my father was a whole other story. My father was a retired butcher who thought he was Beretta, and my father thought he was this crime fighter, and he would walk around the neighborhood. He would go for these long walks every day. And then he would report back to me, I think something's going on at this place. I think something's going on at that place. I'm like, Dad, I work in auto crime. Thanks, but no thanks. But then it got weird when my father finally figured out, I knew for years, Bonanno captain, and then later I think the boss of the Bonanno crime family, Vinny Gorgeous Bassiano, owned a salon on the corner, it was on Tremont between Randall and Roosevelt. And before it was a salon, it was I don't know the name of it, but it was a video store. And then after the video store, he turned it into the salon. And you would always see him out there, and I had nothing to do with him. Once my father figured that out, like in my 18th year, he's like, do you know that guy, Vinny Gorgeous? And I'm like, yeah, I guess my father recognized him from the newspaper. He goes, do you know he's up on that corner? I go, Dad, he's been there since like 1983. So what? Let OSID and the FBI take care of him. They all go down sooner or later. Next thing you know, my father's like, I saw Vinny Bassiano the other day. I'm like, Dad, stop walking past that place, because my thought is my dad keeps walking by that place, and he's probably giving it a hard stare because he's not a cop. And I'm saying to myself, someone's going to come out of there and go, hey, Pop, what are you doing? So I knew I couldn't tell him. I knew if I did, he'd be on the front lawn with a video camera. But the one person I could tell about this was my landlord/aunt. And I knew she would get a kick out of it, and I knew she could keep a secret. My aunt's 18 years older than me, and she was more like a sister to me, older sister than an aunt. So when I tell my aunt, I knew how it was going to go down. She gets all excited. This is great. She's like, which window do you think I should watch it out of? You think I get a better view from upstairs? Like, I don't know, just whatever. And she was all excited, and I said, don't tell my parents. She goes, no, I won't. I said, all right, good enough. So what winds up happening is a couple of days later, I get a phone call, and it's my buddy, and he goes, we're going to hit that place today. I said, all right. I says, good luck. He goes, yeah, hopefully we'll find some product, which is drugs. I said, all right. I hang up, call my aunt up. I go, it's going to go down today about 3 o'clock. Again, don't say anything to my parents. Don't go outside. I says, you can watch out the window, but that's it. Yeah. She hangs up. Now, I know my aunt. I could see her setting up like a TV tray with her bottle of Pepsi and like mozzarella sticks, and she's going to watch this thing, right? So that particular day, I think I was doing a 10 to 6. I worked a couple hours overtime. I got home about 11 o'clock at night. So I find parking on my street. I get out. There's no unmarked cars. There's no cops. The crack house across the street, which usually there's lights on and people out front, no one, quiet. I go into my basement apartment. I lock the door. I put the lights on. I'm not in my basement apartment. 10 seconds. I hear banging on the ceiling. And my aunt, when she wanted to get a hold of me, she would take a baseball bat and start banging on the floor, her tile floor in the kitchen. And I said, why don't you just call me? And she goes, who's got money for that? Okay. So I go up the stairs. I pop up, and she's like, where the hell have you been? I wanted to talk to you about this. I'm like, well, what happened? She goes, well, just as you said, these unmarked vans pull up. These cops jump out. They got a battering ram. They knock down the door. They take this one out in handcuffs. They take that one out in handcuffs. They're standing around. She goes, they were out there for like 2-3 hours. I said, yeah, okay. She goes, and then they all left. I said, yeah, well, that's usually how a search warrant goes down. And she says, some of those cops were really cute. Do you know any of them? I'm like, I might. She's like, oh, maybe you should bring them around. I'm like, yeah, okay. So a couple of days later, I stop by my parents' house for dinner. And as soon as I come through the door, my father's like, did you hear the cops hit across the street? There was a search warrant with cops and they knocked down the door. And apparently my father caught the aftermath of it. I said, yeah. I says, yeah, I heard about it. And he says, did you know that was going to happen? So I said, no. And he goes, you didn't know? I said, no, Dad, I work in auto crime. Why and how would I know what's going on in the narcotics division? He goes, what kind of detective are you? And he was like so disappointed in me. But my old man, he was the type of guy, like sometimes in auto crime, I'd be working in the neighborhood and sometimes you'd spot a burnt car. Now, I'm not going to go into how we catch people for insurance fraud, especially with arsons, but I would spot, one time I was on the service road of the Cross Bronx Expressway, and my father was on one of his walks, and he sees me and my partner at the time, we're taking photos of this burnt car. And he goes, what are you doing? And I said, well, I says, we're going to look into this. This might be insurance fraud. He goes, well, run the plate. I want to see if I know this guy. I'm like, no, I'm not involving you in this. And then my father was just fascinated. I think my father secretly wanted to be a cop, although he did not like cops when I first got hired because he had gotten smacked around and beat up as a kid a couple of times. But by his own accounts, he had it coming. Speaking of insurance fraud, I'll tell a quick story. There was this chop shop. It was a junkyard in Hunts Point. Had no licenses. It didn't have a dismantler's license. Didn't have a repair shop license. It was just a couple of guys that opened up shop in a vacant lot in Hunts Point. I mean, they were paying the landlord. But anyway, we went in there a couple of times, and they told us, get a warrant. We don't want you in here. And I was like, all right. So around the corner, you could look in to the lot to see what was going on. So I got permission from his neighbor around the block. And I'm looking in, and, they're working on cars. And one day I happen to look in there, and I see a champagne-colored Toyota Camry with Massachusetts plates, right? So let's just say, for argument's sake, this is July 1st. And the car doesn't belong. It's in mint condition, and there's all these shit boxes getting cut up, and people are coming and going and buying parts. So I write down the plate. I get back to the office. I run it. Not stolen. It's like, all right. And I thought about calling this person in Massachusetts and saying, your car is in a lot in the Bronx, but I held off. I go back the next day. The car is a shell. The plates are still on it. The doors are off. The fenders are off. They're swinging the engine out with a hoist. They're chopping this thing up. Run the plate. Not reported stolen. So now it's like, this is starting to border insurance fraud, or maybe the owner's out of town and doesn't know their car got swiped. Long story short, about 5 days later, this woman walks into the 4-1 precinct, which is the same neighborhood as where I'm watching this car get chopped up, walks into the 4-1 precinct and files a report saying on, let's just say for argument's sake, July 6th, she came out of her house and her car was gone. And she had the car up until that point. Well, that's impossible because I have photos and a printout dated July 1st. That car is there getting chopped. She says on July 6th or July 7th, the night before, I had my car, it's missing. Insurance fraud, right? So we sit back, the car gets destroyed. We wait for her to file an insurance claim with her insurance carrier, files the report. They send her a check. Now we call the insurance company. We have a fraud case. They say, great, because they know they're going to get the money back. And what winds up happening is I'm working with the SIU of the insurance company. They send me all the paperwork. And I go and I arrest this woman. I go to her house one day. I've got all the reports. She basically tells me, I don't know what you're talking about. I had that car. Arrest her for insurance fraud. So that night I'm in the complaint room in the Bronx, and the DA is giving me a hard time writing this case up. Well, I mean, maybe she got the dates mixed up. I go, a week? Maybe it was more than a week. I think it was more than a week. Maybe it was 2 weeks. And I go, how do you not know where your car is for a week? And she's telling me she had it. I said, she filled it out in a report because along with the 61, the complaint report they started doing in the early 2000s is an affidavit of theft where you have to sign that everything you're stating in this report is true, the options on the car. It's a form that helps law enforcement, and it gives the person time if they're really seriously considering of filing a false police report. It's basically telling them, you sure you really want to do this? So anyway, the DA gives me a hard time, but he writes it up as insurance fraud. So a couple of months go by, and I get a phone call to come down to court, and I see the name. It's her. So I go down, and it just so happens it was the same district attorney that wrote up the case that was being a pain in the ass. And he says, I've offered this woman a plea. She won't take a plea. She's never been in trouble before. He says, I'm thinking of dismissing this case. I go, why would you dismiss the case? We have her stone cold. Well, I've talked to her attorney, and her attorney says she didn't do it. Now, I couldn't believe what I'm listening to. This guy's an attorney. Defense attorneys lie all the time. Suspects lie all the time. Defendants lie all the time. That's why we have court. I got a district attorney telling me, well, the bad guy says they didn't do it, so I'm thinking of dismissing the case. So I got on this guy's ass, and I said, no. I said, really pushed it. And I mean, up until we wound up indicting her, figuring once she took the indictment, she would take a plea bargain. Nope. So we wind up taking it to trial. I mean, this is a huge waste of time. So now we go to trial. There's 2 hearings before the trial. Get past those hurdles. We have the trial. And his biggest hang-up, this district attorney, was, I guess his supervisors didn't want him taking it to trial. In the Bronx and Brooklyn, they tend for property crimes to give everyone a pass because they want to save anything that goes to trial for violent crimes, because they know rolling the dice with these shitty jury pools they might lose, and then that'll hurt their conviction rate. So come to trial, and she's found guilty. And I couldn't believe it. The judge gave her probation. So she would have gotten probation in the first place had she just taken the plea bargain. But usually what a judge will do, and I've had this with different cases where the judge sits through all these hearings. The judge basically knows the deal before they assemble a jury. And the judge will tell the lawyers and the defense attorneys, and he'll tell the defendants, are you sure you really want to go to trial with this? He's giving them the heads up. He's telling them, I know your guy's guilty. But if you really want to waste everyone's time and pull a jury in, and they find you guilty, I'm going to hammer you. And I had that with a burglary case I'll tell that story another day, where the judge just said, you wasted my time, you wasted the cop's time, and bam, he hammered them. But she wound up getting probation. So like I said, a lot of times these district attorneys, you really think that, they're out there, they got your back, and they're going to go after these people, and they don't. They're more interested in going after cops in a lot of these cases. So as always, I want to thank everyone for tuning in, especially my listeners in the Bronx, Miami, Florida, Providence, Rhode Island, Toronto, Ontario, Jersey City, New Jersey, Goshen, New York, Montreal, Quebec, Kansas City, Missouri, and Dallas, Texas. If you work in law enforcement or have an interesting criminal background, please drop me a note on Twitter or Instagram at VicFerrari50 if you'd like to be a guest on the show. If you enjoy the content, please check out my Amazon author page where you'll find my series of behind-the-scenes NYPD books. They're $10 paperback or $2.99 ebook download, including my latest NYPD Presumption and Dysfunction. If you're watching on YouTube, I appreciate it if you hit the like and subscribe button. It helps with the algorithms. Thanks again, everybody, for your support, and I'll have another episode out next week. Thanks again.